Okay, so we're going to kickstart the conversation today, being joined by Renee and Dan from LanzaJet, and we're going to be discussing the importance of diversity and women in engineering. If we could go over to Renee and Dan, and feel free to introduce yourselves and a bit about what you do at the moment.
Good morning, Ariana. So good to be here with both yourself and Dan. My name is Renee Wootton. I'm the Director of New Market Development at LanzaJet. I have had an incredible career in the aviation industry. I started out my career as an aerospace engineer. I have studied and completed most of my education now in Australia and have been with the LanzaJet Group now for I think about 3 months. So it's a very new role at LanzaJet. It's been fantastic so far and working very closely alongside Dan. Over to you.
Thanks, Renee, and thanks, Rihanna. Really happy to be a part of the conversation today. So my name's Daniel Bloch, or Dan. I'm also a recent hire to LanzaJet with Renee, similar sort of time frame, in a Director of Partnerships capacity based out of London. As you might hear from my less than subtle accent, I'm also from Australia originally, but have been living and working out of Europe for the best part of the last decade, really specialising in that sort of intersection of sustainability and aviation. Prior to my time at LanzaJet, I was based out of Geneva, Switzerland, working at the International Air Transport Association, so the global airline trade body, as their SAF specialist. And prior to that, I was at the West Australian State Government as their aviation development manager, doing a combination of aviation business development, sort of your more traditional route networking, including some ultra long haul aviation, as well as also a range of sort of energy transition based projects. So yeah, a nice sort of recap, but these days very much focused in on building out LanzaJet's global profile and really connecting with a whole host of stakeholders across the SAF value chain.
Perfect. Thank you both. So just highlighting on, what you guys have explained about your careers and what you're doing at the moment. Dan, I know you're very passionate about this industry and the future of aerospace and sustainability. So how did this become a career desire with you? If you wouldn't mind just touching over that from, your previous roles leading up to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, honestly, it probably goes all the way back to my childhood growing up in Western Australia, which happens to be probably one of the most isolated parts of the world, particularly Perth, the capital city where I was born. I believe it's the most isolated state capital city in the world where, the closest city is about a 3-hour flight away.
Wow.
Going over from Perth to Sydney to go see my grandparents is the equivalent of going from, say, Madrid to Moscow in European context. And so aviation for me was always something that interconnected me with people that I love. And, that was something that I cherished at quite an emotional level. But if you then pair that with the fact that I grew up in an incredibly biodiverse, environmentally rich ecosystem and was very fortunate to be exposed to a whole host of pretty unique landscapes, I think even from a young age, I had a pretty strong sense of wanting to really protect these really valuable places that we get to call home on planet Earth. And so, it's almost a little bit of a paradox to think about the sort of intersection of aviation and sustainability. But from a young age, that there was always sort of a mindset of sort of fund my way into this, and it coincided very nicely with the sort of introduction of sustainable aviation fuel into the sector about sort of 10, 15 years ago.
Okay, fantastic. And with that being, something you are so passionate about, how did that draw you to LanzaJet?
I think for me, so as I mentioned in the introduction, so I worked for the International Air Transport Association, and in that capacity where I was representing 300 odd airlines, all sort of navigating their own way through the introduction of SAF into their business models and how they could afford a premium fuel as their key driver of abating their emission profile. I was very much exposed to the breadth of sort of SAF producer landscape. I did a lot of listening to that particular stakeholder group, understanding their motivations and aspirations. And I was fortunate enough from, probably 2-3 years ago to be engaged with a whole host of people that are now within the four walls at LanzaJet. And what I really noticed about not just the company, but also the people inside the organization is the real embracing of complexity and almost ambiguity. What we're trying to do is fundamentally shift the way that energy and fuel is delivered to the industry. So to really phrase that, we are the first ever non-oil derived aviation fuel at commercial scale. So there's sort of no disillusionment with just how complex that is. And to an extent, there's almost a need to embrace a little bit of, hey, we're not always going to have the answers immediately. We're really needing to go on a bit of a journey here and not sort of go into that bias toward we need a solution right now. Undoubtedly, that would be nice, but that's just not the reality when we're trying to deliver a whole sort of industry-wide energy transition. So I really enjoy the company's groundedness in both being a pioneer and an innovator, and something as meaningful as the first ever proven non-oil drop-in fuel, but at the same time going, hey, we're here for the journey too, embracing ambiguity and complexity.
I feel like, especially for people listening and, trying to figure out what type of industry to get into and where to go, I feel like what you guys are doing over at LanzaJet, that's definitely a very interesting market to get into, and it's such an interesting and rewarding project to be a part of. Renee, is that the same for you? What draws you to LanzaJet as a business?
Yeah, very much the same. Was lucky enough to grow up on the east coast of Australia, where we have some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. I'm also a proud Aboriginal woman. My people are from the south coast of New South Wales, so I'm a Thurl woman. And, I think from a cultural perspective, we have a deep interconnectedness with our waterways, our country, and it's something we absolutely want to protect. So I think for me, being in such an innovative space, but also having a deep passion for aerospace, lands me in this perfect intersection at being at LanzaJet, because I get to not only contribute to the next wave or the next pioneer or frontier of the aviation sector, but I also get to make sure that the impact that we're having really leads to long-standing sustainability for the aerospace sector, which is huge.
Yeah, no, definitely. And one question that comes to mind is obviously with what LanzaJet are doing at the moment with, so much support to the market and sustainability within aerospace, people looking to come into the business, how do LanzaJet support women in STEM? Because a lot of our listeners, candidates we speak to, they are females either in the industry or looking to get into the industry that, I think from your guys' perspective, would love to get some insight into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a woman in STEM myself, I think one of the first things I noticed about LanzaJet that they do so well is build an incredibly equitable culture and a safe space for women to truly learn and step up and be supported in their roles. So for me, I kind of came in without as much experience in sustainable aviation fuel, but certainly a long history in aviation and aerospace. And there has been wraparound support since day one. I have been valued quite significantly for the skills and the experience that I bring. I've been given an opportunity to sit at the decision-making table and have weight in the voice and the experience that I have. So I think LanzaJet are really leading by action in that regard through internships, engineering roles, and creating an incredibly diverse space with people from all walks of life being a part of the LanzaJet team. I think it's very much the day-to-day things that for me make me feel truly supported. So it's not one single thing that LanzaJet do, but they certainly have a culture of promotion, of support. They truly value their people. And I certainly feel, and Dan, I would love to hear your thoughts on this too, but walking in, there's not many companies in the aerospace sector that you walk in on day one and you are just hit with this level of, wow, this place is really special. We kind of, the passion, the engagement, just the diversity of the people around us has been truly inspirational for me from day one, and certainly something I've been looking for and kind of craving in my career, is finding this space where people really want to change the world. They really want to support each other, and they're excited by bringing all of their life experience, their diversity, but also their knowledge and expertise to one place. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, would echo your sentiments very much, Renee. I think, look, leading by action is a really good starting point. I think in many respects, when you come into the four walls of LanzaJet, both physically and sort of with us, like Renee and myself, being in the remote outposts, you definitely get a sense of the visible, active presence of a whole host of diversity across the organisation. That includes gender, but not limited to. I think there is an unspoken valuing of different perspectives that is just fundamentally required in order to deliver a solution to a problem that's also fundamentally human-based. We have to be led and informed by those that we're trying to solve for. So if your organization is sort of very much driven by a dominant sort of demographic, it's invariably going to be pre-biased toward that kind of thinking. And so, anything when it comes to progressive and transformative change has to be accountable to those it's trying to solve for. And I think to that extent, LanzaJet gets that, and I really appreciate about the company. But what I would caveat by saying as well is that none of that works if there's not an intentionality. It's not just you sort of walk in and it's there. There has to be very much a purpose-driven approach to this, where it's not just, hey, we're bringing in a woman. It's consistency. It's we're bringing in a diverse array of thoughts and perspectives in order to improve our company and improve the likelihood of us achieving our solutions, which are targeting a climate crisis. That's really what it comes back to. So as a consequence, you're going to see women in leadership, but equally, you're going to see targeted efforts to upskill everyone in the company, not limited to women, right across the breadth. And I think that's the point. It is an equal approach, and that is really what we need to be seeing. And I think finally, as a really important point, it's that regardless of position, LanzaJet enables a culture where everyone is given a belief in their ability to speak up, to be visible, and to voice their opinions. Everyone comes with a different perspective, different backgrounds. We have a whole host of experts through the organization. And I think it's really unique about LanzaJet where, we've had all hands meetings, for example, where the entire company gathers in, and our CEO, Jimmy Samartzis, will call upon the interns to present in front of the entire group for half the meeting. You know what I mean? It's not the little 5-minute section, it's half the meeting. And I think that's the point. And what you'll see, again, we had these summer intern groups, and they were absolutely unbelievable. And again, you're talking about a fundamentally cross-sectional representation of gender, of ethnicity, of expertise and skills. And the fact that the company has placed a value on giving them voice and giving them an opportunity to really put forward their critical opinions. This is going to be fundamental for the company going forward.
Just on that point.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Rihanna, I was just going to add to that point. I think a great example of this actually is we had a young female engineer approach me in the first months that I started. I gave a bit of a speech on my background and what I'd done throughout my career, and a few of the female aerospace engineering interns were really inspired by that, as well as the junior engineers. And I was approached to not only mentor them, but then also one of those young women are now working in our team, in the marketing team. She had some spare time, was really curious to expand her skills, and again, she was supported by the leadership team to come on board and diversify her experience. So another great tangible action that is really supported within the workplace to kind of make sure that our people are really looked after in front and center.
I think that's really great information, for all of our listeners, and even myself hearing about the company. It's great to hear how they support not only women in STEM, but the whole business as a whole. It sounds like they've got the culture right, the support's there, and like you said, action, that speaks so much louder than words, and it leads an example. And I think, anyone listening, whether they're a candidate, whether they're a client, whether it's someone looking for industry knowledge and just to do a bit of research into this, I think, anyone who's listened to that would have some sort of interest in LanzaJet and, want to go and find out more, because I think they're on an amazing journey. They sound like an amazing business. And I think, yourselves and anyone else looking to get into that company is very lucky for the support that they have. So hopefully that's something, we can educate our candidates on, and young people looking to get into the industry, that there are businesses out there like this that, off the get-go, no matter your background, what level you come in at, the support's there, and it's not only from your peers on the same grade level as you, it's from, people at all different levels within the business. So I think that's fantastic to share. Question I do have is not only just about women, but all young individuals as a collective that want to get a better start in the industry. When they have the right qualifications and academic background, what can help them get that best start? What sets them apart from the rest of, everyone else who's just left with the same degrees as them, all going for the same jobs, and they really want to stand out?
Yeah, I might start on this one and then hand over to you, Dan. So I think gone are the days where your academic qualifications alone change the direction in your career. I think that from my experience personally, what I've found is that attitude, emotional intelligence, underpinned by great academic qualifications are the game changer when it comes to opportunity and working for employers that truly are, front runners, state of the art, and working on some of the world's biggest challenges. So for me, I started my career in aerospace engineering. I became a commercial pilot, and I'm now doing my master's in aerospace engineering. And for me, that really is underpinned not by my hunger to try and collect all of these accolades. It is because of my hunger to learn and to build my knowledge in the industry that fuels my fire. And what do I mean by that? So at 15 years old, I joined Air Force cadets and found my love for aviation. I wanted to know everything there was possible to know about aircraft and this aerospace industry that no one in my family had ever worked in and I'd had no exposure to previously. And then that hunger grew into then finding incredible job opportunities. I worked for our national carrier, an airline called Qantas. I then went and worked in different aerospace jobs. And I think one thing that really stood out for me is I loved being a generalist. I loved learning about all things across the aviation business. And so for me, what has become incredibly prevalent, or I guess my point of difference to a lot of my peers, is that I've always been curious and I've really chased opportunity. And so I've had this attitude of perseverance and resilience and never giving up and never really taking no for an answer. And I mean that in the most professional sense. So if I really want to get experience in a certain way, or I really want to get my hands onto a certain document, or I really want to get into a meeting and understand what's going on, I keep asking questions and keep trying to kind of break down that barrier until I find a way around it. And I think that really comes back to this curiosity and determination to not take no for an answer, or to keep getting back up after a setback, or, again, working around barriers that are perceivably, unavoidable at the time. I think another huge point of difference these days is self-awareness. So how do you put yourself in other people's shoes? If I think back to my first leadership role, or being a young leader just in a junior role, I think the things that really make a difference is being able to appreciate other people's circumstances and step out of your technical job and really become a support person, provide a hand up to the people around you and help bring this sense of community, not only in your workplace, but in your personal life as well. So self-awareness, and again, empathy and emotional intelligence. So your job is no longer just your technical job. Your job is now to create a wholesome community where people can learn from each other, grow with each other, rely on each other, and get the job done as well. So it's really holistic. And I think that there's still this sense of your job and your life are separate, when very much, I think, in today's case, we really value flexibility. We really value work-life integration. So how can you integrate the way you work and create flexibility for your team, or support the people in your team to really be able to integrate their work and their life? And finally, what I might add is just amplifying those around you. So I think gone are the days where there's this relative sense of competition. You're no longer competing against people, you're competing against time to solve the world's biggest issues. So how, again, do you uplift your community? How do you tackle these issues and put the issue at the center of your work and help people around that? I might finish there. Dan, what do you think?
First, I'd just love to call out that last point you made. I love it. It's that whole idea that we're competing against time. I mean, fundamentally, whilst you've got businesses all around the world that are rightfully trying to make money, the truth of the matter is none of us are successful unless we are addressing the biggest problem at hand, which is, human-made impacts on climate change and whether we are in a position to abate those effects or not. And the point to be made there is, you need to sort of come up against a system which is, to be honest, for the large part, defines strength as its ability to be relatively more successful than, the organization next to you. And to an extent, whilst every company should still try and be successful and make money, certainly LanzaJet is in that situation, we should also be celebrating the success of the ecosystem as well. And so very much taking that self-awareness piece that you touch upon, Renee, and understanding that includes supposed competitors. You know what I mean? We need to start thinking about this as not just a strategic business conversation, but really more of an existential crisis. And that is fundamentally what we're seeing. We're seeing a Category 5 hurricane hit Florida right now. And, this is not something to be scoffed at. At the same time, we're seeing droughts intensify. We're seeing crop yields reduce drastically. And we need to be really quite alert to this and understand that if we try and sort of fit our parameters around traditional KPIs and business models, we're probably missing the point a little bit. Just circling back, though, to the question and building upon some of the other answers that Renee had put in there, the other thing I'd add to in an educational setting is really deliberately putting yourself in scenarios where you have to hold 2, 3, 4 pieces of information, often conflicting or contrasting against one another, and try and work your way through it. You know what I mean? Like a really classic fundamental example of that is sustainability itself. It's a definition, right? It's a numeric or our sort of function where it is meeting the present needs of this current generation plus without the impeding of future generations. And of course, sometimes achieving one conflicts with the other and vice versa. The same with aviation net zero. And, you look at the airline industry where you have one of the world's thinnest profit margins for any sector. In the best of times, airlines are making a handful of dollars per passenger in profit, whilst at the same time are needing to abate their emission profile. And that largely is going to be driven by SAF, which comes at a premium relative to their fuel bill. So you have to weigh up these sort of contrasting pieces of information and use that as the genesis to start having your conversations and breaking down the problems. And to that extent, finding some level of comfort or fire in the belly to address these ambiguities and complexities. I think that's the point. We are needing to understand that a lot of the big transformative changes that we're going to have to address require a huge amount of reflection that's connected fundamentally, again, with empathy and understanding who are we trying to solve for? What are we really trying to achieve here? And to that point, this is probably the last thing I'd say on that, is when we think about engineering, project development, when we think about it in theory, we often talk about it when it's going really well in ideal settings, developing it in our home market. So LanzaJet is a company in the US. We're building out projects at the moment in the UK, plans for Australia. We also need to challenge ourselves and go, how does this look, for example, in the developing world? Where we're not just talking about energy transition, we're also talking about the fundamental development of a critical energy system in the first place, where it's not a given that everyone has access to abundant energy. So it's a different conversation. It comes with a different sort of emotional weighting, and as well as a very sort of different practical implication as well. And so the point to be made is, from an educational standpoint, don't just sort of frame your thinking around your sort of, best case scenarios. Also sort of frame it, well, how does this project look like if I'm sort of up against it with a whole host of different challenges? And I think, if you can sort of put yourself in that position where you're willing to and deliberately putting yourself up against challenges, then you're going to be better sort of placed to then come out and sort of tackle them in real world settings.
Just to add to that too, sorry, Rihanna.
No, go on.
I just wanted to kind of touch on the fact that, so where Dan and I are coming from is your academic qualifications are heavily weighted, but there's so much more to that. And there's so many ways that you can tackle a problem. And so diversity is really important in that. And therefore, coming back to how do women get a better step up and leg ahead, or how do we keep them engaged and involved and wanting to kind of build these incredible careers where we are innovating future jobs, sustainable outcomes. I think mentoring is another piece that I haven't really touched on, but is so important. So the people around you with either the experience that you're seeking to build, that either emulate the values that you hold or represent an inspiration or an aspiration for you to kind of work towards, these are the people you need to be surrounding yourself with as well early on in your career, because they help with not only your really big, fork in the road decisions in life, but also the everyday decisions where you have moments of self-doubt or you're not sure about which course is going to provide the best value for you, or you're looking for the right workplace that emulates the values that you hold. There's so many ways that mentors can truly lead and help you lead yourself. And that's really kind of the crux of that first few years outside of university or coming into the workforce, is building your self-confidence and having a community of people around you to support you. And generally the people that have years of experience or are kind enough to give you their time and help you make these kind of day-to-day small decisions are the impacting decisions that then lead to these incredible career opportunities. So I just wanted to touch on that and make sure that that was also a big part of this conversation too. We can't do this alone.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, mentorship and, reaching out to your peers, whether they're within, the same company as you, whether they, in the same market, whether, whoever they are, I think mentorship is such a big thing. You gain so much from people's personal experience as well, not just what you learn academically. And I think it's really interesting to hear from both of you, your views on that. And Dan, what you said about, you've got your best case scenario of the situation you're working on, but putting yourself in, I suppose, that more uncomfortable position where you're going to look at it from both sides, and really go out of the box with that. So I think a lot of personal attributes, what people are willing to do additional to their qualifications and, enhance not only their personal skills, but their knowledge and what they can share with other people. I think that really has a big part to play, and is probably, as someone in, your position, as people as hiring managers, etc. I think that's quite an attractive attribute to have when you see candidates put themselves out their comfort zone by doing the extra mile and, just taking their self-development as a really personal thing, not something they're being told to go and do. Do you know what I mean? They take the accountability to go and find them achievements already.
Yeah, and if I might add on that, Brianna, it's about crossing bridges. You know what I mean? Like, you can be a really strong subject matter expert on something complex. Like for myself, and I say this knowing that I've got a long, long way to go in my own personal journey, but I've spent a lot of time on sustainable aviation fuel over the last 10 years. So I understand it does come with a degree of expertise, but it means nothing if I'm not taking the time to think about how it resonates with whoever I'm talking to on a given day. And it's a very different conversation if I'm having a chat with a farmer in rural US versus a government policymaker versus an airline versus an aerospace manufacturer versus a financier. And if I'm not sort of willing to go the journey in understanding their pain points, their complexities, and their thought processes, then I'm never going to be able to actually hit home. So to that extent, listening and then being able to translate what you are really working with in a way that's meaningful from a communication standpoint is fundamental. And so that really is part of the self-awareness piece.
And I might even add further to that point is that when you want to work in these fledgling spaces where you're innovating something or building an entire new industry, which is the case to sustainable aviation fuel, you have to be willing to adapt. You have to be somebody that is able to step into that fear of change and push through it and come out the other side. A great example actually with some of the conversations I've had with the early career engineers in LanzaJet is a lot of them have approached me and gone, oh my gosh, you're an aerospace engineer, but you're now leading customer experience for LanzaJet. How did you do that? And so for me, it was being curious and not knowing what was on the other side of a completely different job, but then still taking it anyway. I became a technical expert, and I've moved now across people, commercial, and customer experience strategy. But it all started with my technical skills in engineering and in flying. So again, how do you think about adapting your experience? Again, for me, I was always chasing that curiosity, and at times I was asked to step into non-traditional engineering role. And whilst it scared me at the time, I made the commitment to myself that yes, I wanted to grow in that way. So, how can you think about change no longer being fearful to change being exciting? And I guess the more you step into that, the more often you change or build or grow yourself in new ways, the more comfortable you get with overcoming that fear that is associated with any sort of change.
And I think a really great thing about what you was just discussing there, is the different avenues that you can have within these careers, going from more technical roles to, dealing with more customer support focused and commercial side of the business. You've got such a varied career, avenue to go down. And I think, you can transfer those skills into so many avenues that, it's just an exciting industry to be in where there are so many options, because sometimes the candidates don't always know exactly where they want to go. You want to be within the aerospace and aviation market, you have the right qualifications, but it's knowing what depth you really want to take. Should it be management? Should it be your subject matter expert? So I think it's really nice to hear from you guys, the different type of career backgrounds you've had as well, because it's more relatable to people that are listening and, at some point they're on that same journey. So thank you so much for going over that.
Right.
One question I did want to go over is for individuals of all backgrounds interested in impacting the industry and increasing female talent, as well as other minority representations, and this is for both of you, what would your advice be to get an aero and STEM positive message out to future young engineers? And also, if we can include with this, what age should we be targeting to introduce these options to?
I'll jump in, Rihanna. I think just to address that latter half of the question, I think the conversations and to pair with that, the actions start from childhood. Values around the circular economy and this whole notion of both reducing consumption where we can, removing bad habits from our behaviors, and really getting into these principles of what it is to become more sustainable on our day-to-day. I think that really then makes this whole process much more intuitive. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be technical, but just, for example, in this whole notion of finding ways to repurpose waste sources in a day-to-day life is really standing for what we're doing at LanzaJet. We are repurposing just about any form of waste stream that you can think of into a renewable fuel. You can embed that sort of value set in children arguably more efficiently than adults. And so it's very much from the ground up again. And I think the critical part in if we want to have a gendered conversation here, and of course it goes much further, but there's just absolutely no sort of need to segregate the conversation from boys to girls. This is a fundamentally human-driven problem. And, it sort of almost pains me to feel like I need to point that out. But of course, it does warrant saying still at this point in time. And to that effect, it's making sure that if then sort of as children are then progressing, that young girls and young women feel confident in being able to say, hey, I want to build things. I want to be able to construct these big projects that can take these wastes and turn them into something valuable. Beyond that as well, I'd say one of the best things that we can do for, the inclusion of diverse talent from outside the industry is to be really fundamentally aware inside the industry as to why this is intrinsically valuable. You know what I mean? If again, we sort of see this as just a compliance issue of, okay, it's important, we have to tick our boxes. Again, we are missing the point. I think the truth of the matter is, and again, this goes beyond just a gendered conversation, but if you see the way that energy and fuel and aviation have been led and run over the past century, it does have a particular look and feel, and it has been predominantly male driven. And so to that effect, I think having that internal awareness and dialogue as an industry in seeing that we fundamentally need to expand in order to not just do the right thing, but to actually have the most likelihood of equipping ourselves with the right mentalities, perspectives, and traits across the breadth of humanity in order to be able to achieve this outcome that we're all trying to go after, and that being addressing the climate crisis. And so that's one of the biggest things that can take place. If we're not having that internal dialogue and understanding initially, then it really renders a lot of the efforts that we do going out to attract new talent as rather superfluous.
I think
I was going to say, sorry, Renee, if you wanted to add to that.
Thank you. So I think Dan really touched on something that I think is important, and it's societal, and it really starts from the day we're born, is the conversations that parents and families are having at home. And so I think that there is a really strong weighting in the way in which we allow girls and boys and everyone really to experiment and get curious as kids. Little comments where maybe a parent will say, "Oh, don't touch that. It's gross," or don't touch your brother's toys, or girls should have Barbies. Whatever the comment is, there is certainly a societal influence on how women start to build their appreciation for the role they take in society and what sorts of careers for them. And these opinions and perspectives are generally formed very early in their lives. So, by the time they're in year 3 or year 4, they generally know what's for boys and what's for girls, for example. And so I think that, one way that we can start tackling this is that we need to let all kids be curious, and we need to let them explore all topics from a young age and build their own knowledge of the world around them by being curious, letting them observe ecosystems, be in nature, play in the sandpit and get dirty, whatever that looks like, but not forcing, thoughts or opinions on the roles that they should be taking. I am a part of the Superstars of STEM program, which is a program run by Science and Technology Australia, which is all about smashing gender stereotypes for women in engineering and in STEM, and is all around the positive news stories that we tell in the media and the way in which we platform and show that women are taking up leadership roles in science, technology, engineering, and maths. And what that does is it allows people to be able to see what they can become. So again, making sure that we're promoting diverse people in diverse roles is really, really beneficial. And I think the next point would be, which we've touched on lightly, is helping women build their self-confidence. And that's stepping into non-traditional roles where there very much is the gender stereotype or the bias or the heavy dominance of males in these roles. And aerospace is certainly one of those industries. I think that at times in my career, I've certainly been the only female on the floor in engineering roles, and they're still predominantly male-driven. I think today in STEM in Australia, the diversity is sitting around 27% across all science and technology roles. So we still have a very long way to go when it comes to getting equity at the table for women in STEM. So coming back to helping people build their self-confidence, I think that mentoring piece is going to be really important. Making sure that women are supported, they have extra validation, and that they have male champions around them. For me, Dan is one of those male champions at LanzaJet. I've kind of stepped into a field again that I didn't have as much expertise in, and I'm really growing and building that experience on the job, which again, I'm really comfortable doing because I've done that a lot in my career and I know I can do it. But having incredible colleagues around to really help support that transition, to really back you and to be a team from day one is incredible. And I don't think that that's the general experience in the aerospace sector, unfortunately. And again, coming back to, are you working in the right places as well? For me, I've been incredibly intentional with who I choose to work with. I have seen the value and the, I guess, destruction that can happen when you're not working in the right place. And so I think that being incredibly intentional and really pressuring, your employer to provide opportunities and to make sure that you're getting what you deserve, and then knowing when to call it quits to kind of move on and find the right jobs is also really important. So, I mean, increasing diverse talent in Aero is not only something that you as an individual can contribute to, but it's also something that needs to be heavily valued in your leadership team. So how are you going about promoting that in your workplace, but equally, how are you going about being supported in the workplace? So it's certainly a circular economy, I think, when it comes to diversity in aerospace.
If I might just quickly circle back as well, Renee, I think you touched upon this whole idea of gender stereotypes. And I think one of my reflections is we're so often, I think, mistaking the notions of masculinity and femininity as gendered concepts rather than sort of broader traits that we've sort of socially defined. I think the point to be made here is that men should be demonstrating a healthy set of both masculine and feminine traits just as much as women should also be demonstrating feminine and masculine traits, and that is going to fundamentally benefit everyone. If we sort of pigeonhole into gender stereotypes, then we're all missing out. We are all missing out. I think that is the point. And so within the workforce, that is precisely why we need to overcome this whole idea that, a certain gender works in a certain area. It's too binary. It's too oversimplified to really get into the heart of what we require. I mean, again, when we think about, let's call it 20th century sort of traditional sort of fuel industry, it's not just it's been a men-dominated industry, it's been a particular type of men. There's a whole host of other men that haven't had a voice in that industry just as much. And maybe it's because they're more softly spoken, or they're not the one that's really emphatically trying to place their opinion on top of the others. But maybe they're a bit more introspective. Maybe they're a little bit more reserved. All of these traits have a place. Ultimately, again, we are trying to have a broad representation of perspectives, views, and ways of breaking down problems. And it can come across in many, many different ways other than just your ability to impose it in a group setting. And the point to be made is that last trait can be displayed by both men and women. So we need to really overcome this whole masculinity, femininity is a gendered concept notion. Otherwise, we're really quite hamstrung in the way that we are assessing this topic.
Yeah, I think that's some really great, conversational topics here to be having. And I think what's great about what you both have said and been able to pick up from each other is, if we are just going to categorize people based on their gender, we're missing out on so many skills and so much knowledge. The same as Dan, where you said, this isn't a tick box exercise. People within the industry need to understand the advantages of, looking at a diverse group of talent. And, there's so much more to learn than what we already know. If we surround ourselves with the same type of people, we all know the same knowledge, we're missing out on so much. And, we learn from each other. And, Renee, what you were saying about learning from a younger age and, parents being involved with that. And I think it's so important because people are very much a product of their environment. And, we learn from what we're told as children by adults. So we put ourselves into them categories and what we should be doing and what we should be learning about. So I think, going at a target audience of, the younger generation, when they're so creative, they're so curious and excited about things, is great to get, the whole STEM message out to them, because I think they'll be more receptive to it from a younger age, instead of introducing it to someone who's, coming into the end of their education. They've already had for the last 5 years an idea on what they want to do. It's almost like that. Why would I listen now? So I think that's really important. And what you said about the mentors, and the confidence you get from people around you coming back, I think it's a really big part of this. And I loved when you said, and it's very obvious to anyone listening, Dan is clearly a big support for anyone in the industry of any background. And I think, you guys are lucky to have him over there. So I think more people, with the mindset that you both have and, the inclusivity and support to, all generations. It's not just the younger generation, but, I think, it's so important. So thank you both for homing on that. Naturally, anyone can tell you're both very passionate about the industry. So what would you both say is the most inspiring thing about aerospace? Why should individuals want to enter this industry?
I'll kick off, Dan. So for me personally, aerospace changed my life. I am the first in my family to enter this incredible industry, and I think just seeing the opportunities and exploration and innovation that comes with being in this industry is truly exceptional. Whether it's developing new aircraft, advancing space exploration, or addressing global challenges like sustainable aviation fuel and sustainable aviation, it really means contributing to cutting edge technology, science, engineering, and addressing issues that really impact the future of humanity. And I think that that's something that can't be undervalued. The human race has become so, interdependent and reliant on aviation and aerospace. And I think it is a fundamental component of the way that we operate now as a global community. So to be able to now improve the impact that it's having and share the exploration of kind of the next endeavor and how do we make this the best industry possible is something that I'm really passionate about. And so having diverse perspectives, fresh perspectives where women play crucial roles in, unlocking that value for our global community is something that's so important in the way that we plan for our future and tackle some of these challenges. Dan, what are your thoughts?
That's a great answer, Renee. I think on my side, look, I think for me, aviation really stands for connection, and that's human connection. I think if I look inward in terms of what drives me and what puts fire in my belly, it's about learning about this world. There is so much to be curious about and so much to discover, and aviation is the international enabler of that discovery. I think the contrast is that the world becomes a far bigger place without aviation. And I don't think it's particularly desirable for that to take place. With distance comes consequences like, let's call it, to be delicate, misunderstandings, misperceptions. We want to bring people closer together as a means of breaking those things down. And to that extent, I also factor in the idea of, the joy that comes from just experiencing these new things, these new wonders, these new environments, food, culture, history, language. These are things that are so innate, I think, to us as a human species, and something that when you experience for the first time, when you really go put yourself in another setting, it can bring pretty profound things out of you. I remember when I traveled to Europe for the first time when I was 15, I went by myself to go for an educational experience. And I realized that I needed more of that exposure to grow as a person and to get myself out of that comfort zone. Now, the second sort of string to this whole answer is that I factor in that I think the statistic is 80% of the world hasn't flown yet. And so what really drives me right now is I want to build an industry where that 80% can have access to aviation, that they can enjoy the same benefits as the 20% who have been able to be in some part educated, uplifted, and inspired by that interconnection with the rest of the world. And the fact of the matter is, if aviation as a hard-to-abate sector doesn't reduce its carbon footprint, it currently accounts for about 2 to 3% of global emissions. If it doesn't, make proactive steps now to reduce its footprint, then by 2050 that could be 10, 15, 20% of global emissions as other sectors with easier paths to decarbonisation achieve their goals. The consequence of that is that its global license to operate at its current scale will just be fundamentally reduced. And a consequence of that is that aviation becomes more expensive and just for the elite. And I think that's just not desirable. what inspires me and drives me now is to make sure that more and more of that 80% proportion of humanity that hasn't had access to flying gets that access, because it's fundamentally beautiful.
I think
that's...
Oh,
Sorry,
sorry.
go on, Renee.
I keep doing this to you, Rihanna. So sorry. I just wanted to add that I think, to Dan's point, being a global community and having access to travel is actually something that is a true point of difference at LanzaJet as well. Our CEO, Jimmy Samartzis, is very intent on, for us to be the best in the business, we need to be in person. We need to know our customers. We need to know our clients. We need to know their culture, their context. And again, the nuance of doing business these days, and a point of difference that people can work towards in their careers, is truly thinking about the other perspective and then addressing their concerns, their pain points, their issues. And to do that in the most effective way truly is being in person and understanding that context. So travel is truly key in a global community and should be readily available, because it does change your life. It provides that sense of inspiration that keeps you moving in the right direction.
No, I think that's fantastic. And, I completely agree. I think as a market, it's so inspiring and there's so much more to it than people think when they just hear aerospace. And I think the beauty of it is not only does it allow us to travel and explore so much of our planet, but it allows us to discover as well, areas that we don't even know about, beyond our planet as well. So I think it's such, there's so much in the industry that you could cover and talk about, and, no 2 days are going to be the same. You're not going to be stuck for a project or something to look into and something to develop. So it's really, I think it's great to hear the insight from both of you, and they both intertwine actually very well with what you both find so inspiring about the industry. And I'd definitely be interested to find, from people listening, their answers on this as well, like what inspires them to know more about the industry, whether they're working in the industry or if it's a hobby for them and it's something they just find so interesting and just want to keep up to date about. So thank you so much for sharing that. Renee, I'm going to target a question a bit more towards you, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Just to, touch again on women in STEM and just a bit of a personal approach here. What would you say you find are the key challenges for women within the industry? And, I'd be really interested as well as a different perspective for Dan and you to touch on this afterwards as well. I know you can't speak as a woman in the industry, but, as a peer and someone who supports, a whole diverse group within the industry, I think it would be really important to get your views on this as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I think the challenges of being in the aerospace industry, we've briefly touched on some of them, but I think culture and male dominance is probably where a lot of the challenge begins. Women may be overlooked for job opportunities because they're not part of the boys' club. They may be overlooked for opportunities because they're not as bold or confident or haven't been given the validation and support from their leadership teams to really step up and, really step into the strengths and their experience. I know for a fact, particularly early on, confidence is a major challenge for young aspiring engineers. And again, coming back to having that mentor around to almost weekly or monthly connect with to really address some of those challenges. I know for me, in my personal experience, I would suggest a fairly unique run at the aerospace industry. I was 17 when I started at Qantas Airlines. In my first year of university, I was fortunate enough to start in the Maintenance Operations Centre and had two leaders in that role that I'm still incredibly close with today. And in fact, one of them is coming to my wedding next year. So for me, I walked in on day one and was given the opportunity to build and contribute to real projects, build real skills. By 19, I was presenting to the executive leadership team because the executive manager of engineering at the time provided me with the opportunity to present. And, that meant that whilst the opportunity was available, I still had to step in and step up and take that opportunity. So I still remember my knees knocking and not being sure why I said yes, but then getting up and presenting a presentation that then led to, me being able to go to British Airways for a 6-week project on engines. And so it's all of these little things, like you saying yes to opportunity early kind of leads to then the next opportunity and the next experience. And that is all underpinned by having incredible leaders around you that realize that you want the opportunity, you're hungry for the opportunity, and so they'll open the door for that opportunity. So the challenge really has to the challenge is that people don't always have those opportunities presented. They don't always have supportive leaders around them. And I think as my career has kind of continued to grow, where I really see challenges that male leaders at times aren't recognizing the value of their female colleagues and providing those opportunities. Outside of that, my career has also really taken off because I've had constant mentors. Those mentors haven't just been my direct managers, they've been programs that I've applied for and entered into, as well as, family members, community members, a real diverse array of people and people that I truly, truly trust and who are values aligned. So again, I've had so many challenges throughout my career, but I've always had people to go to in those moments where it really mattered. And I can't believe at times, to be honest, how often I come across young professional female engineers who don't have mentors, because I can see how beneficial and how much they've impacted my life. And so for anyone listening today that does not have a mentor, I encourage you to write that email, to make that phone call, to just reach out to anybody that inspires you, even if you don't know them, even if they're, a person on LinkedIn that you've been following for a while, whoever it is, just start reaching out to people, because you'll meet people that have had this incredible life experience that yet you can kind of draw from without having to go through that yourself. And so you kind of miss these periods of time where, somebody had to go through this self-discovery to figure out what was the right answer, whereas now you have the person that's figured it out and they can tell it to you directly, and you get to miss all of this kind of period of time where the struggle was far more than it needed to be. So I think opportunity being made readily available, having mentors around to constantly support you are where the challenges really exist. And then the final piece is that self-confidence piece for me. So anytime I meet young engineers, they just don't realize their potential. And it's because people don't tell it to them often enough. And again, that comes back to having good people around you to support you and to mentor you. And so it's that mindset piece and the story you're telling yourself. You are worthy, you can do this, you will learn, you'll get through this hard time, and constantly having that positive kind of spin. I think that if you believe a negative sentiment that's kind of being fed back to you without having, again, that support person, that mentor to connect with, you can really internalize that. And you can internalize that cumulatively over years. And what that does is it deafens and slows your career, because you're not putting your hand up for that opportunity. You're not taking on roles where you can really reach your full potential. So building this resilience, this support network, this positive mindset early in your career will transform the rest of your career. If you miss that throughout, that first kind of 10 years in your career, I truly think that will slow you down in so many ways. So what can you be doing different today, whether it's working for the right employer as well? I think culture, the people they're attracting, the types of people that are in businesses, again, can truly have a huge impact on your self-worth and what next steps you want to take. So how are you being quite intentional with who you're working with? If they're not treating you right, what steps are you taking to really start managing that yourself? Yeah. So in summary, build your network, think about things, take action yourself, try and have a positive mindset, and put your hand up for opportunity, even if your knees are knocking when they come.
Thank you, Renee. And I think what's great to hear about that is, with these challenges, there's such a positive message and a positive outcome from this. And if both of you don't have messages looking for mentors by the end of this, then I'd be very surprised, because I think, the advice you give and the life experiences and the understanding you have towards, the whole industry and just people as a whole, I think, it's refreshing and it's quite hard to come by. So I think you're not only going to be giving people listening, the confidence, whether they do reach out to people and find mentors, the confidence to do so, it will just give them that self-reassurance. Maybe they just needed to hear it from someone else that, all the challenges you face, they're not all negative. It's not all, the last destination. There's such a positive spin on this that you learn from. So thank you. And Dan, I'd really love to hear what you think on that as well.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of things that come to mind. Actually, probably a nice segue into that. First and foremost, the mentorship conversation is, I'd be pretty remiss not to give a pretty significant shout out to my own partner, who I've been able to explore this whole topic around the women's experience within industry. She herself works in international development, specialising in areas of women's peace security and feminist foreign policy. And I've had many discussions at length with her in terms of how men can be a meaningful ally to this cause, and really supporting women whilst acknowledging the weight of being sort of a young, also white male in my case, and really understanding the bearings of that. And first and foremost, just a great opportunity to recognise the importance of mentors. So she's been absolutely tremendous for my own personal and professional development. But I think in terms of myself and how I see this situation, it's definitely not for me to put out conjecture in terms of the women's experience, but there is absolutely a conversation to be had with men, among men, and I think that's the key point. It's men to men, in understanding that this is not just a women's issue, in a sense that just because we're talking about women in engineering, that doesn't make it not a men's issue. They themselves have to be actively a part of this movement as well, if it is to get ahead, because it is really in everyone's interest. I think that's the point to be made. Everyone is interested in achieving the goals and being successful as companies, and ultimately breaking down these problems that we're trying to address at a societal and an environmental level. So part of that is understanding, for us as men, what kind of environments are we creating? How does it look? How does it sound? Is it welcoming? We can't trivialize this idea that for a woman walking into a setting where there is that kind of maybe locker room talk or sort of big, verbose, loud kind of environments, as a very stereotypical example. Of course, they're not always like this, but that is going to feel uncomfortable. We have to be very active in thinking, is this a setting that is going to feel comfortable for more than just the people that look and sound like me? It's the same as hiring patterns. We need to overcome any trace of predisposition to hiring the person by default that looks and sounds like you. And even at times, really embrace the person that's willing to challenge the narrative or to apply a completely different lens to the problem than you might have in mind. It's the same idea where, really it's much more than just gender. This is about compiling a team of complementary skill sets. It's like in an Aussie rules football game, a rugby game, a cricket game, a football game. There's a whole sporting lineup there, and everyone's got their roles. And part of the idea is your role, your teammates' role standing next to you, and the broader role at a team level as well. And you're communicating among one another each of these different segments. And the point to be made is, if you had the same person or the same type of person with the same type of skill sets in all of those positions, the team would be woeful. And so coming back to the point here, unless there is a real active intent among men to see this issue of inclusivity as not just a women's issue, then again, we are missing the point, and we're not doing what is ultimately the right thing to do and in the best interest of company and progress. So to men, don't be afraid to ask questions. Often I think men are scared. They don't know how to start this kind of conversation. I know for myself, even now, there's a part of me that is very much questioning my legitimacy to be on this conversation. But you have to rip the Band-Aid off. You have to understand that if you approach it with genuine, honest intentions, you're willing to listen, you're willing to adapt, you're willing to make sure that even small changes these shouldn't be trivialized. These really do add up. So go attend the Women's Breakfast for Sustainability and Engineering. Go and be a part of a social club within the four walls of the organization, which often have been only women-led. You know, I'm oversimplifying, but statistics are probably there to back it up. So in all, just to recapture, it's not my place to sort of say what are the challenges experienced by women, but I can certainly reflect upon the role that men need to have at an active level, active participatory level in this conversation.
Thank you
Well
so
said.
much, Dan. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think, it's fantastic that you are, I wouldn't even say the words comfortable, because sometimes, again, they are uncomfortable conversations, but the fact that you're willing to have that conversation and, give us your opinion on this topic, I do really appreciate it. And I think it's great for anyone listening to, hear a different perspective and the way, we should all be supporting each other, no matter what the diverse group is. If there's a topic to discuss, it shouldn't just be hosted with the people that fit into that category. Otherwise, we're really doing ourselves a disservice here. So I really appreciate that. Thank you both so much. Final question, which I will home in on, is skill shortage areas within the aerospace industry. I just want to get an understanding from you both, within the industry, what they are and what companies like LanzaJet are seeking from people looking to get into, career avenues with them.
So I think certainly some of the topics we've talked through today address some of those. So at LanzaJet, again, we're trying to essentially build a new industry from scratch. And so that takes true diversity in all forms, ideas, life experience, work experience to bring together the best solutions in the world. And I think that that's truly reflected in the culture of the company as well. Outside of that, again, I think that there is a lack of, I suppose, concentration and focus when you're going through university on what it means to not only have incredible academic skills, but also be a true and authentic team player. And so I think when you're coming out of university, everything is really fixated on you need to have the best marks. You get the awards like the Ducks and Dean's Awards lists for your academic performance, but there's no true recognition and incentive for you to be the sportsman, the team player, the collaborator, the person that's building up other people around you. So I think that's a truly challenging mindset change, a systematic change when you come out of university into the workplace is your whole frame of reference around how to succeed in the workplace is completely different. It's no longer based on your academic skills. It's all those other things that we've talked about today. So I think when you're coming through university, some of the ways that you can address that is getting involved in student associations, getting different forms of work experience early on through internships to really start working through some of those skills shortages that we experience through university. And then in the workplace, I would say it's quite nuanced. It really depends on the culture, the product, the service that you're trying to offer. From the LanzaJet experience, it truly is, we're trying to do things completely different. So you need people that are willing to push through those barriers, to embrace fear and change and do things differently. Whereas if you're a well-established aerospace business and your focus is reliability and competency and doing the same process over and over again to a high standard, you're not going to place as much emphasis on that perhaps collaboration and fear of change, and you're really looking for people that like their technical expertise and are really strong in replicating process, for example. So again, I can't speak to the skill shortages across the aerospace sector generally, but I think if you are someone who's incredibly ambitious versus somebody who likes routine, again, that's that self-awareness piece. So who are you? Who do you want to work for? What are your values? So that you can start thinking about where is the right place for me and where am I going to thrive? Dan?
I think on my end, the first thing that jumps to mind, and again, probably a nice shout out to my partner. So she works in something called primary prevention. Now that's in a conflict analysis or conflict resolution scope, where the whole idea is rather than trying to find ways to reduce conflict after it's happened, you go to the root causes and you try and start there and understand why is the problem and why is, in this case, the conflict happening. I want to apply the exact same lens. If you think about what we're trying to do at LanzaJet, like I said at the start, being the first non-oil derived aviation fuel for the industry as a sustainable aviation fuel producer and technology provider, we're trying to really rewrite the way that energy systems are going to work. And part of that, when you're capturing the sustainability piece, is it's far better to prevent the problems from happening in the first place rather than curing them after they've taken place. So what that requires at a skill set level are real sort of systematic thinkers that can sort of see the bigger picture of their actions. Obviously, it does require expertise at a more granular level when you're an engineer, project manager, financier. But are you then able to sort of step back and see how that interplays with the rest of the ecosystem and consider what are the consequences of action A on person B over here who's looking in action C? And it's very much that stepping back and seeing the big picture and then diving in and understanding the nodes that exist in between them and drawing the lines and the dots between everyone that's existing in that ecosystem. If we can set up an industry that's founded on, like we said, taking waste streams and ultimately things that are causing us as humans environmental problems, social problems, public health problems, and repurpose them into something very valuable, namely in a renewable or circular fuel that directly transitions us away from fossil, then in my view, this is one way in which we are preventing and not curing the problem, because we are diving in at the root cause of something that's causing us great grief around the world. So systematic thinkers applying the human lens and understanding where their piece of work fits into the greater scheme of things.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, both of you. And I just want to thank you both so much for your time having this conversation with me today. I think, it's so insightful, not only for myself, but for anyone that's going to be listening as well, getting a good understanding about your background, your views on the industry, the things that we could be changing, and just a good understanding on LanzaJet as a whole as well. It's been really insightful. So thank you so much. Also, it's not a question, but if I could just from both of you get a quick tip that you would, like to share to anyone looking to start their career in the industry, or people that are already within the industry and looking to, get that confidence to go forward, what would you say to them?
Look where the fire is hottest. Rip the Band-Aid off, get out there, enjoy yourself, ask questions, and ultimately don't be afraid to be the one that raises their voice in a positive sense. And I say that particularly to women. We need your voices, and there's going to be allies out there more and more.
That's brilliant. Thank you. And Renee?
I think from my side, don't be afraid to put your hand up. I think coming back to the opportunities available in the aerospace sector are unlimited. There is more than enough for everybody in the world to get involved in and help us solve some of the greatest challenges in the world. So that takes, putting your hand up and making sure that you're in the driver's seat. So don't be scared to ask for help. Don't be scared to ask that question, and don't be scared to surround yourself by the people that you want to reflect.
Thank you so much, Renee. Well, thank you both so much. I'm really looking forward to, listening back to this conversation and sharing this with our network as well. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rihanna. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.